Greetings, brothers and sisters. America and Israel launched an unprovoked war on Iran, assassinating the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, as well as several leaders of government, and 5 days after, at the time of writing, the leaders of the English-speaking Caribbean have been impotent and speechless in the face of a clear violation of international law and a direct attack on the principle of state sovereignty. They once again refused to take a stand, not even a token condemnation of the killing of approximately 150 children at a girls' elementary school in Minab, western Iran, by U.S.-Israeli missile airstrikes on 28 February 28, the first day of the attacks. Can you imagine the messages of condemnation and supplication to our current Massa if such an inordinate number of children were killed by the Iranians? It is virtually certain most of our governments would respond like triggered Pavlovian dogs, issuing statements expressing their revulsion at such savagery and violence. The double standards and hypocrisy is revolting. America and Israel, for the umpteenth time, demonstrate they can unilaterally use armed force to destroy a nation, and yet our leaders ignore the underlying danger to the sovereignty of our small islands. They demonstrated similar impotence when the Americans unilaterally attacked Venezuela and kidnapped its president, Nicolas Maduro. It doesn't take a degree in international law to recognize that if Maduro could be kidnapped under false pretenses, then how about any prime minister or president of a CARICOM nation who President Trump or his sidekick, Marco Rubio, accused of being narco-traffickers? What did they do after Maduro was kidnapped? Caribbean community leaders held an emergency meeting shortly after the operation and issued a statement that they are actively monitoring the situation. There was no outright condemnation of the U.S. action collectively. It is well known CARICOM is deeply divided, as Trinidad and Guyana, two founding members of the grouping, are de facto allies of America and happy to see America attack Venezuela, but the other leaders also zip their lips. Did they think that such mealy-mouthed response would restrain Trump and Rubio from such action in the future? Proof of the pudding was provided in February when Marco Rubio used the recent Summit of Caribbean Leaders, to which he was granted the right to address, as a platform to defend the action of the U.S. in Venezuela. Irrespective of how some of you may have individually felt about our operations and our policy toward Venezuela, I will tell you this, and I will tell you this, without any apology or without any apprehension: Venezuela is better off today than it was 8 weeks ago. Rubio may have been speaking softly, but he was carrying a big stick, in the fashion of former President Teddy Roosevelt, a believer in American hegemony over the Western Hemisphere. In actual fact, since attacking Venezuela and kidnapping Maduro, the U.S. has become bolder in making demands of Caribbean governments that are against interests of their peoples. Not only did they intensify their embargo on Cuba, but they are forcing Caribbean nations to isolate themselves from their biggest neighbor by pressuring them to abandon the Cuban Medical Assistance Program. The latest to succumb to U.S. pressure is the nation of Dominica, which just announced it will revise its Cuban Medical Workers Program after criticism from the United States Embassy. They follow in the footsteps of the Bahamas, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts Nevis, St. Lucia, Antigua, Guyana, and Jamaica. This is despite the critical support that Cuban doctors gave to Dominica's medical system, a partnership which spanned more than 30 years. The Dominican government is being forced to deprive its people of professional health care. According to World Bank data, the density of doctors per 1,000 for Dominica was 1.116 per 1,000 in 2018, rounded to 1.2 per 1,000, for an island whose total population is between 66,000 to 67,000. The loss of about 65 Cuban medical personnel, including physicians, specialists, nurses, and technicians, will be significant, while the Trump administration and Marco Rubio threaten and bully the Caribbean to join with America in isolating Cuba. They offer little or nothing as a replacement for the medical assistance program. It is inevitable that the state of public health in most Caribbean countries will go from bad to worse, thanks to Daddy Trump and Little Marco. As part of this pattern of bullying and blackmail, as recent as January, the U.S. Department of State paused all immigrant visa, green card, permanent residency issuances for nationals of nine Caribbean countries from a total of 75 countries deemed at high risk of becoming a public charge, relying on U.S. public benefits. They included Antigua and Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Notable exceptions were Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, the two nations that were unambiguous in their support of U.S. aggression against Venezuela. In addition, as of February 2026, Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica face particularly strict measures to single entry valid for only 3 months. Eligible applicants may need to post a substantial bond, up to $15,000 in some cases, before visa issuance. The Americans are fully aware that visa issuance is a critical pressure point, not only for the citizens of the region, but also for the politicians and the local elites, due to our dependence on the U.S. for both goods and services, as well as the myriad family and social ties with the Caribbean diaspora after decades of outmigration. Many in social media believe that maintaining their precious U.S. visa may have influenced the response of Caribbean leaders to the blockade on Cuba, while the divided Caribbean leaders keep silent and fail to denounce the rampant abuse of international law. Illegal U.S. actions will inevitably have real economic impact on the region. Since the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes, there has been escalating retaliation by Iran, including attacks on energy infrastructure and a declared closure of the Strait of Hormuz. This has triggered a sharp rise in global oil prices, and sooner or later, these increases will spread to the Caribbean. They will not only affect motorists, but also the cost of public transportation and electricity generation. Not to mention that increased cost of aviation fuel will have a knock-on effect on airline ticket prices, causing reduced demand for travel to the tourist-dependent nations of the Caribbean. Should this conflict continue indefinitely, the Caribbean will have few, if any, allies in the international community to help us out. They did not speak up when they came for Venezuela. They did not speak up when they came for Iran. Now they're coming for the Caribbean. Nobody is left to speak up.